We rarely stop to think about language and its true role as the ultimate middleman and go-between, the filter through which all thoughts and ideas must pass through if they're to be expressed and communicated. The importance and responsibility of language is, of course, immense, and practically impossible to overstate. A failure in the clarity and precision of our language is like employing a dishonest translator, misrepresenting or mischaracterizing a person's heart and mind. Degenerating language inevitably acts as both cause and effect of the decline of cultures and nations, a precursor of chaos and confusion. We live in an age in which popular culture dictates our norms, our morals, and, yes, even the evolution of our language. We can't help but be a product of our influences, and nothing reaches more minds than the collective influence of our media. Hollywood and New York are far more powerful than any government, because politics is very much downstream from culture, and when it comes to prevailing culture, they call the tune to which most of the world dances. Some might object, but I don't watch much TV, or go to the movies, or take in mainstream news. Okay, but do your friends and family? What about their friends and family? We're all connected. Nobody escapes this cultural osmosis. Regardless of your amount of personal discipline or your level of awareness, no man is an island, especially not in the modern technological age. Accurate communication is becoming extremely difficult, and my contention is that this is due to a willful perversion and poisoning of our language by factions that have recognized the immense power behind such tactics. Broadly speaking, I believe that most people are good-natured and want the best for the world at large. I truly believe this. Even the most hateful creature screaming at you on the streets wasn't born that way, but rather degenerated into this chaos gradually, usually due to a snowball effect of compounded errors of misunderstanding over time, often beginning with their parents and an unfortunate chaos in their formative years. It's confusion that causes them to act contrary to the best interests of their nations and their neighbors, ultimately even themselves. And I believe the root of this confusion is our collective failure to put forth the effort to speak and think clearly, our failure to maintain the means to properly communicate ourselves to others, to be sure we're being understood. For example, remember when racism referred to the hatred of other races and the active seeking of their harm or destruction? Or when sexism implied overt hostility towards the opposite sex? These terms actually had a specific and clear meaning, recognizable to all. They were efficient in that sense. These days are long gone. These have now become what's referred to as power words, often used, whether consciously or unconsciously, as an efficient tool to divest power from one group and grant it to another. Here's how the process seems to work. Step 1. Attach as much negative emotional force as possible to a word, using every means available over a suitably long period until the word practically radiates perceived toxicity. Step 2. Subtly begin to widen the definition, to increase the number of individuals that fall under its umbrella. Step 3. Profit, as people begin to flee this umbrella to take the path of least resistance. After all, who wants to choose such a hill to die on when it could harm one's career prospects, one's image, or offend anyone that doesn't know enough about you to judge you with the benefit of proper context? This is how rapid social change is manifested. It's essentially an exercise in branding, a skill set that the right lacks almost completely, and that the left has practically mastered. Two choices are presented. A difficult one that may cause endless misunderstandings, heated debates, heartache, stress, and cause others to believe you're someone that you're not. Or an extremely easy one, perhaps requiring that you compromise your heart and mind, but in return providing that safety and security that comes from moving with the herd. Anti-Semitism is another great example of the absurdity of our recent language evolution. pull back for a moment and try to analyze this term objectively and dispassionately. What is its purpose, and what is its net effect with regard to our ongoing cultural discussion and debate? Imagine if other groups were allowed to use such power words to squelch the expression of any sentiment critical of them. Let's use Russia as an example. Nobody could make the claim that the Slavic people haven't faced the most extreme hardship, persecution, and outright atrocities throughout their history. And in fact, Russia and Ukraine have endured the loss of more innocent life than any other people over the past century, with tens of millions being brutally raped, tortured, starved, or worked to death in slave labor camps at the hands of Bolsheviks. Imagine Slavic peoples pointing to this history of hardship and subsequently using anti-Slavicism as a label to any that dared speak a negative word against Putin or Russia or the Russian citizens for any reason. Aggressively silencing the negative half of the debate leaves only the positive, which would foster only neutral or praiseworthy commentary towards Mother Russia, and within a relatively short time, we'd all agree that Russians could do no wrong, which would only serve to further strengthen the term anti-Slavicism and its weaponized power, such as the power of language and language controls. Our next category of words are the misunderstood power words, those that most people have lost a true understanding of, yet continue to use in the manner in which they've been programmed. These include words like prejudice, discrimination, judgmental, stereotype, and several more which we won't cover here. Perhaps in their infancy, these words were used with good intent, with the goal of keeping an eye on the natural tendency towards hatred or groupthink. But again, let's pull back. What are the actual definitions of these words we've been taught are so vile? Prejudice, preconceived judgment or opinion. Discrimination, recognition and understanding of the difference between one thing and another. Judgmental, of or concerning the use of judgment. Stereotype, a simplified and standardized conception or image invested with special meaning and held in common by members of a group. Picture yourself walking home late at night in a dangerous neighborhood, faced with the decision of which side of the street to take. On one side, you see an elderly woman hobbling in your general direction. On the other, you see a 20-something male. In this split second, which side might you choose? Yes, it's within the realm of conceivable possibility that this elderly woman is one of the world's foremost mixed martial arts experts, who has had a terrible day and has sworn to kill the next person that looks at her sideways. But broadly speaking, the likelihood of her presenting a serious threat is practically non-existent. The likelihood of the man posing a serious threat is extremely low as well. But as your brain quickly scans through its totality of context, involving your own personal experiences, those of others in your social circles, as well as any relevant data and statistics you've digested through the years, you made a snap decision, which may help keep you safe. In doing so, you've engaged in prejudicial behavior, discrimination, stereotyping, and, by some standards, sexism, ageism, even racism, should the male figure happen to be an ethnic minority and the elderly woman white. We do such things every day. We've been blessed with faculties that allow us to draw upon our knowledge and understanding to make judgments, with the intent of keeping us safe, secure, happy, and prosperous. Nature has granted us these gifts as a means of self-defense. Refusing to recognize group traits and tendencies makes us less informed, and leads to a reality that feels more chaotic and incomprehensible. Those that willfully reject these informational datasets become less knowledgeable and understanding of the world around them as a consequence. I think most people would agree that unjustly engaging in prejudicial or stereotypical modes of thought or behavior is wrong, but this is no longer the stance of many of those who use these terms so aggressively. The distinction is no longer drawn between unjust or hateful prejudice and stereotypes, and those that are logical, helpful, informative, illustrating just how absurd this language pollution has become, and just how muddy the waters are. And notice that all 4 of these words revolve around making use of your logical or reasoning faculties, engaging your judgment, using data or anecdotes from others or your past experiences to seek to make informed decisions or classifications. It's as if there's a concerted push to convince us not to trust our own intuitive judgment, and instead to look to formulate our opinions from on high. There's something deeply unsettling about this. The word equality has become another absurd linguistic monstrosity. Initially, the common usage of this term appealed almost universally. Nearly all of us are seeking a level playing field in which people can rise or fall based on their ability and the amount of effort put forth. However, this word has morphed over the years, stealthily, from meaning equality of opportunity to meaning equality of outcome. These 2 definitions, again unfortunately housed under a single word umbrella, couldn't be more different. One allows for a natural and healthy system that rewards and incentivizes the best and brightest, allowing for the greatest good to most efficiently come into being for society at large. The other leads to artificial constructs that punish ability and effort, and reward incompetence and laziness. The situation on the language front has degenerated to the point where someone can ask, unironically and completely without elaboration, "You're not against equality, are you?" Such questions are exasperating and leave the listener with the responsibility of trying to read the thoughts of the questioner. Are they asking if I believe all people should be equal? Or asking if I believe that all people are equal? Or are they asking if all people have equal opportunity and equal rights under the law? I think more often than not, those people who pose such questions don't know what they're asking, and are simply using superficial means to paint you as bad and themselves as good by comparison. Our discourse has become this infuriatingly simplistic. Tolerance may be the most obvious absurdity of them all. This concept has been elevated into a moral virtue by those gatekeepers of popular culture over the recent decades. In fact, perhaps the foremost moral virtue. Again, let's pull back. What does this word truly mean? Its most common definition is to endure, to put up with, implying the passive acceptance of something one views to be dangerous, harmful, degenerate, or bothersome, or somehow counterproductive. We're taught to tolerate increased crime, the destruction of traditional moral and ethical values, and all varieties of profoundly negative change, and that it's moral to do so. It's difficult to think of a more efficient means of destroying a nation than to goad its citizens into tossing their culture and traditions into the dustbin, to instead tolerate and embrace others, to sacrifice the safety and happiness of future generations in exchange for potentially avoiding offending someone. And of course, the ultimate irony of so much of this speech policing and control, especially when it comes to matters of race or sex or ability, is that it almost always has the opposite net effect to the one intended. One of the ways a person can know he's being dealt with in an open and honest and straightforward way, and know that the person across from him is being genuine, is when they feel free to engage in good-natured ribbing. For example, a surefire way to make someone in a wheelchair feel uncomfortable is to do everything in your power to avoid mentioning their predicament, or speak to them in the pitying or condescending tone so often adopted by those most obsessive in their political correctness. Walking on eggshells immediately signals a falseness or inauthenticity, and a condescending tone signals that the speaker believes the listener to be somehow inferior, regardless of the words they choose to use or avoid. It also prevents us from recognizing and embracing our unique strengths and weaknesses, both as individuals and groups, and acting accordingly. This type of intellectual dishonesty is paralyzing. And our next category is the created with the intent of weaponization words. Firstly, conspiracy theory. Many of you probably know the history of this term, and the fact that it was purposefully injected into American society in the late 60s by the CIA and their Operation Mockingbird, and subsequently nurtured and molded into the shame-inducing ad hominem it's become today. in part to prevent attacks on the Warren Commission findings regarding Kennedy's death. Having done a tremendous job of making sure the term was always uttered with a derisive sneer or a mocking chuckle by the heavily infiltrated press, this term has become one of the best examples of the perversion of language, eliciting visceral Pavlovian reactions in all who hear it. But again, let's pull back and analyze the word or the term itself. Is it not human nature to work together towards some common end? Does this not happen often behind closed doors? Of course. We are conspiring creatures, some conspiring for good, others for bad. Yet, the emotional baggage attached to this simple term has become so extreme that the word is essentially weaponized, able to be used as an extraordinarily powerful means of marginalizing those that ask dangerous questions. The term progressive is another great example of a weaponized word. Putting aside the fact that those who fall under this label tend to fight for a set of ideas that seem to promote chaos, inefficiency, and disorder, consider for a moment just how brazenly aggressive and manipulative this word is. It implies progress, moving forward towards a goal. And in a sense, this is technically accurate, assuming the goal is the creation of a domesticated population, cut off from their cultural roots, with their borders destroyed and their people disarmed, and in your total disregard for the lessons of history. The word implies improvement, success, betterment. It also implies that those who oppose this ideology are regressive, not only refusing to progress towards a goal, but actively working to move backwards, to make things worse. This term is immensely powerful, an indoctrination masterstroke. And although most on the right would view the ideology of those who call themselves progressive as the epitome of regressive and degenerate and unhealthy, many of us still fall into the linguistic trap of using this word in the manner in which its creators intended. Fake news. This is an amusing one, a weaponized term that backfired on its creators, and an example of how to win the language battle. The term was rolled out with the intent to paint all alternative sources of information as fake news, crowning the controlled media owned by just 6 corporations as the only source of valid information, which would have given them total dominance over our informational streams. Trump, whether because he saw the larger game plan or simply because he bristled at the shamelessness of the pot calling the kettle black, managed to judo the inertia of the term into his favor by flipping the script and pointing out just how brazenly dishonest our controlled press has become. Because he repeated it often enough and because the truth of Trump's accusation resonated with so many, this weaponized term has since become one of the most significant self-inflicted wounds of those seeking to deceive. Our next category is the inaccurate descriptors we may be well served to examine more closely words. Elites. This term bothers me deeply. It's the best example of unconsciously giving in to an extremely unhelpful and inaccurate narrative. First, let's look at the definition. A select part of a group that is superior to the rest in terms of ability or qualities. I blame Alex Jones for the cultivation of this term in the popular psyche, aggressively railing against the elites whenever speaking of globalists, rootless cosmopolitans, international bankers, etc. The problems are twofold. Firstly, anyone that believes the aforementioned groups are truly elite subsets of humanity by any objective standard has some serious judgment issues, in my opinion. I'd class them as the polar opposite. In a corrupt system, the most corrupt elements naturally win out and rise to the top. We have a kakistocracy, not a rule by elites. I see mediocre or above average intellects, but almost no genius of any sort. Merely cleverness and shrewdness, and this is a very different thing altogether. Secondly, the fundamental premise of railing against elites doesn't sit well with me. A healthy and just hierarchy is an absolute necessity, a prerequisite for any strong and healthy society. And the simple truism applies to all of nature, stretching from the chimp societies observed by Jane Goodall to our own societal constructs. The problems facing the West don't stem from being ruled by elites, but rather by our not being ruled by true elites, the best and brightest, the most noble and just, benevolent and wise. Calling our current power brokers elites, and simultaneously railing against the concept of being ruled by elites, is the epitome of hopelessly muddying the waters, and the longer-term effects of such muddying are devastating. The mischaracterization of race as simply skin color, and the common phrase about differences being only skin deep, are other examples of abuses of language serving to further set back our understanding of race and forestall any honest discussion on the topic. Countless millions now equate race with the pigmentation of one's skin, as if one can become part of a different racial group via an extended vacation to any sunny destination. An oddity that any man of science would have been equal parts horrified and confused by back in the day in which science wasn't so infected by the whims of popular culture. Other words that may fit in this category would be language traps we often fall into due to lack of awareness. For example, calling an event like Iraq a mistake, which, although true in its most technical sense, serves to help absolve its instigators of the responsibility for launching a war they knew full well had nothing to do with weapons of mass destruction. Or calling our leaders incompetent as opposed to criminal or corrupt. Such word choices might seem minor on the surface, but their implications, especially on a meta level and over time, are profound. This type of language pollution we've discussed here, and its resulting direct and indirect effects, the broader push to keep us from engaging our intuitive judgment, has literally cost lives and has ruined countless more. For example, imagine how many parents in places like Germany or Sweden have passively bought into the language abuse mentioned above with regards to educating their children, and have thus stripped them of their right to discern, disarmed them of their intuitive judgment when it comes to dealing with potential threats. For example, those posed to young girls by the recent influx of millions of male migrants, who bring with them very different moral and ethical structures. When our clarity breaks down, our ability to communicate breaks down, and this can only lead to chaos, violence, degeneration, and devolution. Our energy dissipates, we become angrier and more aggressive, seeking to set things right but unable to find a direct means to do so, with each side of the ideological fence finding itself unable to effectively communicate with the other. The best we can do as individuals is to strive to think and speak as clearly as possible. It takes awareness and effort, and none of us can ever fully master the art, but in striving to get as close as possible to mastery, we literally make the world a better place. And not only does this create a positive ripple effect to all those around us, but it greatly improves our own lives, while simultaneously allowing for a more pure totality of context and informational edge over those who insist on doing otherwise. And lastly, if you walk away from anything from this video, let it be this simple summary. Learning to actively discriminate, nobly and justly, is the first step towards becoming a truly independent thinker. And learning to think and communicate with clarity is the first step towards the creation of a harmonious world.